Hello everyone, I'm Maxim Schwinard, and today I'm talking to you again about Irish stick fighting. And today we're going to be exploring a question which get asked a lot. Probably one of the most asked questions about Irish stick fighting is, why have I never heard about Irish stick fighting? It's an interesting question. So mostly comes from people that are in Ireland, or people who have strong Irish connection, and it's mostly because, as some people might know, Irish stick fighting is nearly absent from Ireland right now. Now, these people are usually very skeptic about Irish stick, and it's understandable. It's an art that's very rare, that's not seen often, and there are many charlatans in the world of martial arts, as some of you may know, and of course caution is always important. So let's try to answer the question, why have you never heard or seen Irish stick fighting before? There's many reasons that could actually explain this. Simple answer, because it's rare and elusive. One can always discover things about its own culture, its own country, and I don't want to sound like I'm trying to teach Irish people about their own culture, but myself, there's things that I don't know about my own culture. I'm French Canadian. I was born in Quebec. I have Irish ancestry, as you might be able to tell, but a lot of my ancestry is also French, and right now I live in Ontario, and there are things that I don't know about my own culture. And even more so if these elements are only practiced by one or two people. Of course, there's probably a lot that I don't know about, and I would be surprised to discover. Number two, there's a lot of negative stereotypes about Irish stick fighting in Ireland. So it's not well known that it still exists today, but it's well known that it existed before, mostly in the 19th century. And historically, bataireacht, as we call Irish stick fighting, was dismissed as being a part of faction fighting. And faction fighting in Ireland was seen as, by many, as a corruption of the British rule over Irish people. So the elite responsible for promoting the sports in Ireland chose disciplines that were actually seen as pure Gaelic in a sense. So that could be connected with Irish culture, mostly from the heroic period, so times of Cuchulainn and the poems and traditional tales, such as, for example, hurling. Now, there's also other sports that were included in this, and that at the time people did not know had actually a British connection, interestingly. But anyway, that's out of our current discussion. So there's also the question that Irish stick refers back to the stereotype of the Irish brawler, and we're going to come back to this during the video. So the Irish brawler, of course, always drunk and violent, and was used by British authorities to justify their grasp on Ireland, arguing that the Irish were a violent people, unable to govern themselves. So this is a stereotype that Irish people are trying to extinguish today. And of course, Irish stick is seen as an obstacle in this. So when I mention Irish stick in discussion, some people say, oh, no, so this is going into dangerous territory. But there's more to it than what it appears at first. So, now in my opinion, and that's my opinion, it was a mistake to push away Irish stick fighting. And take, for example, the Japanese in the 19th century. So, believe it or not, but the Japanese in the 19th century were seen as a violent and barbaric culture. Mostly because of the samurai and all the tales that people told about them, and also because of their martial arts. And the Japanese themselves, rejected this part of their culture for a very long time. But after a while, they started to retake martial arts and made them into the symbol of self-improvement that it is today. So, not that there are no Japanese martial arts or martial artists that are violent today, quite the contrary. But the reputation has changed considerably. I myself teach Kenjutsu and Irish stick, of course, and there's a very wide difference in how people react when I tell them that I teach Kenjutsu and when I tell them that I teach Irish stick fighting. But this is one way in which I'm trying to promote Irish stick fighting today. Not by diluting it, or by turning it into a sport, or by turning it into something that it's not, basically, but by showing how it can actually be used as a tool for self-improvement, and how it's not just a violent art that we should forget. So, a third reason is that Irish stick is just going through a renaissance right now. What this means is because Irish stick was left to wither and die for more than a century. Bataireacht is not the greatest, is not currently in the greatest of shape. There's few people doing it, only 2 familiar styles that we know of, and only one of them is still currently represented in Ireland. In fact, until recently, the last time that the art was mentioned in documentation in Ireland was in the 1930s. So it does not have, like many other martial arts, a big list of practitioners and teachers that can show a line, a line of documentation of history to show their credibility. So 99% of styles actually died out in the 20th century. 2 of them miraculously survived, being transmitted from father to son until now. And because of this, the world of Irish stick is a very small one. There's a handful of people still practicing it, but most of them are active in online discussion groups. And this is one thing that actually surprises me. A lot of people who are skeptic about the existence of bataireacht say that they know all there is to know about martial arts in Ireland. They've searched for many years. They never found anyone doing it. But curiously, I have never seen any of them active in any of the discussion groups that are actually researching the subject and which have uncovered treasures that completely change our perception of the art today. So, or even confirm what we've learned through the traditions. So, if these people are serious in their study of traditional Irish martial arts and want to learn more about Irish stick fighting, well, there are groups actually discussing it and resources about it. And if you've never encountered any of those resources, I would question actually the seriousness of your own research. Another reason is that people are not necessarily conscious about what they know, what they have, or what they've learned. Before the internet, there was very little consciousness in Ireland of what bataireacht was. And so I find a lot of people were taught to fight with a stick, or learn about it, or heard that their family members at some point were doing this, but they never really knew that it was so unique, or that was really an Irish martial art until now, because people are starting to communicate about this, and that's the beauty of internet. It brings out some very isolated people and connects them with others with similar interests, and it creates a movement like what we have now. So there are probably other traditions that have been passed down, but people don't know what they've inherited. So my own teacher tried to find other people doing bataireacht actually in Ireland by joining discussion groups, and realized that he was one of the only ones left. So reason number 5, it's only practiced by plastic patties. So for those who are unfamiliar with the term plastic patties, people often call plastic patties people who are, we all know people like this who pretend they're Irish on St. Patrick's Day, but barely know anything about Ireland or Irish culture. So this is probably the most interesting and the most damageable reason for why Irish stick fighting is not known today, because it creates kind of a vicious circle. Irish people don't want to practice bataireacht because it's only practiced outside of Ireland, and so more people outside of Ireland learn it, and people in Ireland don't want to do it, and so on and so on. So bataireacht is on its way to become really an art of the Irish diaspora. But why is it practiced so much elsewhere, not on the island itself? First thing to consider, the size of the Irish diaspora is enormous compared to the actual population in Ireland today. And the Irish culture is a very strong one among expatriates. So yes, there are a lot of people with an interest in Ireland and in Irish stick fighting when they can find it outside of Ireland. Secondly, and perhaps most importantly, people do not resent the stereotypes the same way. In North America, the infamous Fighting Irish is a popular symbol, as many of you might know. People kind of enjoy the stereotype of the Irish brawler, and I'm absolutely not saying that it's a good thing, but in Ireland, and sometimes here too as well, a lot of people resent this association, understandably. Again, this is why Gaelic sports and music were promoted much before stick fighting. The shillelagh itself is not universally appreciated in Ireland, and it's often associated with the infamous leprechaun or the drunken brawler. And again, this is an image that we're trying to change, believe it or not. Reason number 6, there is a culture of secrecy. Many of these styles were for a long time the exclusive skills of specific groups, specific clans. And they did not want these skills to be learned by people outside of the group. You could say, well, we're not in the age of factions anymore. What's the problem with these people? What's the deal? But many martial arts traditions were like this for until very recently. And some are still like this. Think of Chinese Kung Fu. You've certainly heard stories about how secretive many of these teachers were with their techniques. Or Japanese classical martial arts. Many of them still have rules about teaching or demonstrating their skills. So keeping your secrets meant having an edge over your opponents. Even though there were documented schools of bataireacht. Yes, actually there were schools teaching this in the 19th century. So I'm gonna say, well, that's all fine and dandy, but okay, maybe Irish stick fighting still exists today, but how do you know that this is the real deal? How do you know that you were not taught some bogus, as we would say, bullshito techniques, you know? And it's a very good question, you know, and it's something that I myself taught about when I was introduced with the style. So how do we know it's authentic or not? Well, after all, you know, there's many fake styles with invented histories, invented traditions, and around scamming people. Maybe Irish stick is the same, right? Well, you see, most of these styles, most of these bogus systems can be identified by, I would say, three main telltale signs. So, number one, they're rarely practical. Number two, they have wild pretenses, such as saying, "Oh, you know, our style has been around since the ancient medieval age, or you know, it's been passed down in secret for centuries," and so on and so on. So their techniques also do not stand to an historical examination. When you're familiar with the history of martial arts, with historical styles, you can kind of easily determine if a style fits into a specific culture, because you know other examples, so you can kind of cross-reference the style and see, okay, maybe this works in this setting, but if a style, let's say, practice in Spain, it looks really much like Kung Fu practice in the Temple of Shaolin, it's probably a problem. But, okay, so what about Antrim? Well, let's look at this. So, first off, the techniques are practical. But that's my opinion, right? You can judge yourself if you see some of my videos, or if you take the classes. But you see, I personally, I think there's no nonsense in what I was taught. Secondly, there's no wild pretense. We can document the history of the style to approximately the mid-19th century. Maybe it's older, we don't know. So we're not making wild claims without proper documentation. The techniques also have been proven to be incredibly close to documented sources. And this is the point I'll expand on right now. So I learned this style in 2007 while spending a summer in Ireland with my brother-in-law, Emile Boudreau, and through contacts that we had before we left, again on Irish Stick online communities, discussion groups, we met our teacher, John, who had, as I mentioned earlier, joined discussion groups on Irish Stick, and to find training partners in Ireland. He had already met somebody trained with one guy, Louis Pastor, before us while he was away in Scotland. But this is how people became aware of his style. But there were a few people who had actually seen it or trained in it. So at the time, I thought that the art would be relatively common in Ireland. But it was, of course, absolutely not, as we realized on our trip. So we met with John, we trained while we were in Cork, and I was conscious that I needed to ask certain questions to establish the veracity of what we were told. I was young, but I was a stupid eater. I've studied archaeology. I also studied cultural heritage. I actually work as a museum curator, so I have a pretty good background in history and scientific methodology. So even though I was very ecstatic about learning Irish stick fighting, I wanted to know what the deal was, you know. So I quickly realized that John in my opinion, did not have an intensive martial art knowledge. Actually, or at least not one that would allow him to develop such a complex martial art all on his own in small town Ireland. This is not something I think is possible to do. So we came back to Quebec and continued training together. I also documented what we learned, and through a small video that we made, and also through a text that I published online. They're still available today. So I also at that moment started to read more about Irish stick fighting and the history of the art, because we had received the permission to eventually teach. Took about maybe 2 years of practice on our own before we felt comfortable doing this, but we started a small group, and so we in 2008 there's an instructional source that was found dating from around 1900 from a journal that was published in San Francisco, and it described the use of the shillelagh as an Irishman would do. So this article only came to the attention of the Irish stick community around 2010, and I was flabbergasted to find direct resemblances that on certain aspects that were totally unique to this martial art. So, for instance, the way that the stick is gripped in Antrim and controlled is very unique. I've never seen anything like this in any other martial art that I know. But it was mentioned nearly word for word in this article, with very small differences, really. Really, the only difference that it is the stick, instead of being held more classically with the knob on top, is actually held reverse. But that's the main difference in this grip. So the thumb is used the same way, the fingers are used in the same way, the stick is grabbed exactly the same spot, the measure is made the same way. Also the way that you come into guard, which is again very unique to our style, or so I thought until I read this article, is also when you come down, grab the stick and bring it up. It's also described in this article. And this was very exciting because we could see that there was something that no one knew before we were instructed, that actually confirmed some of the unique aspects of our style. So it also matched descriptions of other that are given in other documents, other guides, other articles. And again, I don't think that somebody on his own could have invented this, and the both of us, Emil and me, surely could have come up with this style in only a few months. Now, I understand that some people will never be convinced, and that's fine, to each their own, right? But I'd like people to be aware that Irish stick is a thing. It's unlike many other countries, actually, Ireland has the chance to have kept this martial tradition. And there's few countries in Europe that can actually boast the same thing. There's it's a great tradition that escaped extinction, really by a thread, and it's an awesome art to practice, really. So that's mostly it for my video today. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. And if you want to learn more, stay tuned to this channel. I post videos sometimes on Irish stick fighting, so that people will know what it looks like. So I hope you enjoyed it, and see you soon.